though I do feel you're opportunist.
Y'all, she didn't hint. She didn't tease. She detonated the entire story. Not in secret conversations. Not in coded interviews. Not through carefully planted headlines. She said it openly, unfiltered, unprotected, and volatile, and the second Tasha K unleashed these claims, the Kandi Todd divorce storyline shattered beyond repair. Because if she's to be believed, this was never a love story gone wrong. This was a long, calculated breakdown designed from inside the family. According to Tasha K, the real force behind the collapse was never the spotlight, never the industry pressure, never the money. It was Mama Joyce. Quiet, persistent, ever present. From the very beginning, Todd was never seen as a partner. He was branded, labeled, marked, a liability, a user, a man accused of marrying for proximity, not passion. And then came the turning point, the detail that reframed everything. The prenup, signed just one day before the wedding. Not an act of unity, not a shared decision, but allegedly a document born out of fear, mistrust, and non-stop coercion. Tasha K claims Todd didn't sign it to shield himself. He signed it to defend his character. To prove he wasn't the predator he was painted to be. To prove his love wasn't strategic. To survive accusations that never stopped coming. But instead of calming the storm, that signature ignited it. What followed, she alleges, was psychological combat, kids dragged into adult conflicts, bonds slowly corroded, trust turned into a weapon. A stepfather made unwelcome. One child allegedly pulled emotionally. Another allegedly pushed aside from the very start. Whispers turned into narratives. Narratives turned into attacks. Public embarrassment normalized behind closed doors. And while fans watched picture-perfect moments flash across red carpets, inside that house, it was a war zone. This wasn't tension. This wasn't meddling. This was domination. And now, with the marriage officially over and the silence finally cracking, one chilling question refuses to go away. Did Kandi and Todd ever truly stand a chance? Or was everything sealed the moment Mama Joyce decided he was the enemy?
I said no. I'm gonna be honest with you. I feel like it was a misquote. Because see, if I was the editor-in-chief over there at People, I would have corrected Kandi for her. What led to the breakdown of the divorce wasn't because he was courting women behind your back. It's because he was courting women without you.
Strap in. Because what's being revealed now makes this look less like a celebrity split and more like a case where the ruling was quietly decided before vows were ever spoken. This didn't start with screaming matches, cheating allegations, or financial drama meant for headlines. According to the claims now exploding across commentary platforms, it began with a warning, subtle at first, then relentless, delivered inside a family space where authority outweighed affection. Voices echoing Tasha K's narrative allege that from the very first meeting, Todd Tucker wasn't welcomed as a future husband. He was assessed, scrutinized, cross-examined, branded. And once that brand took hold, every move he made was viewed through a lens of doubt. Allegedly, Mama Joyce never accepted Todd's intentions as genuine. Not once. Not even during filmed moments when smiles were mandatory. Away from cameras, according to repeated claims, the message stayed harsh and unwavering. He wasn't here for love, he was here for advantage. Not for life together, but for access. Not for Kandi the person, but Kandi the powerhouse. And sources insist this belief didn't fade, it evolved into a purpose. Those familiar with the situation say the pressure didn't relax as the relationship deepened. It escalated. Casual talks allegedly morphed into interrogations. Offhand comments hardened into accusations. Every decision Todd made was supposedly reframed as manipulation. Every pause treated as concealment. And Kandi, caught between devotion and duty, was pushed into a position that leaves no one unscathed. Then came the detail now sitting at the center of the storm like evidence slid across a courtroom desk. The prenup. According to Tasha K's recounting, this wasn't a peaceful, practical agreement between two people in love. Allegedly, it surfaced under emotional duress, just one day before the wedding, when backing out would have meant public embarrassment and private devastation. Critics argue the document didn't represent security. It represented suspicion. And the timing, they say, was deliberate. Todd's choice to sign it has since been interpreted by some not as self-interest, but resistance. An effort to dismantle the narrative surrounding him. To prove money wasn't the motive. To disarm the accusation. But instead of ending the tension, the signature allegedly confirmed the fear. Because once mistrust enters before vows, it doesn't simply disappear. What followed, according to ongoing claims, wasn't a honeymoon. It was a silent standoff. On the surface, things appeared functional. Publicly, the family blended. Roles were assigned. Early on, Kandi's daughter Riley reportedly shared a stable and respectful dynamic with Todd. Boundaries existed, but so did routine. Structure. A sense of balance. From the outside, it looked like forward movement. But insiders now suggest that image cracked far sooner than anyone realized. Allegedly, conversations began taking place that weren't meant to heal, but to influence. Language chosen carefully. Doubt introduced gradually. Todd's actions reinterpreted with a darker intent. Sources claim Riley was exposed to a version of Todd shaped by fear rather than reality. And once a child begins to question trust, fractures spread fast. At the same time, another child remained even further removed. Todd's daughter, Kayla. Claims now circulating suggest that Kayla was never fully folded into the family. Not embraced. Not protected by warmth. She existed on the margins, visible, but never centered. According to sources, the energy toward her was colder, sharper, more dismissive. Not openly cruel, but quietly isolating, the kind of distance that leaves lasting marks. Observers note that blended families demand patience to survive. What they allege occurred here was the opposite. Lines hardened. Roles became fixed. And once again, children bore the consequences of power struggles they didn't create. Then the whispers began. According to Tasha K's claims, questions about Todd's character started circulating, insinuations about other women, questionable loyalty, hidden behavior. None publicly proven. None officially confirmed. But repetition, as critics point out, can destroy as effectively as evidence. Once a man's integrity is doubted often enough inside his own home, proof becomes irrelevant. And through it all, Kandi remained in the center. Pulled apart, pressured, fragmented. Those close to the situation allege the environment grew emotionally suffocating. Discussions turned sharp. Sarcasm replaced respect. Tension replaced trust. Todd, according to sources, wasn't just criticized, he was degraded. In private. In public. Repeatedly. Even his parents were allegedly drawn into the conflict, stretching the divide beyond repair. When a marriage becomes a war zone, neutrality vanishes. Kandi was reportedly forced into a daily emotional trial. One side demanded loyalty by blood. The other demanded partnership by promise. And to many watching this unravel, the cost of choosing either was unbearable, because choosing one meant betraying the other. Sources now claim the marriage didn't collapse because of a single blow-up or scandal. It eroded. Slowly. Through exhaustion. Through constant judgment. Through the feeling that no effort would ever erase the original verdict. That Todd was never supposed to be there. By the time the separation became public, insiders say the damage was already irreversible. The silence too dense. The distance too wide. The trust too fractured to restore. What the audience witnessed as a divorce announcement was, according to those close to the situation, simply the final admission of a war that had ended long before. And now, as these allegations resurface and spread, the framing has changed. This is no longer being discussed as a celebrity breakup. It's being told as a warning about what happens when influence replaces intimacy, when fear outranks fairness, when love is forced to survive under constant scrutiny, when a marriage is never allowed to stand on its own because it's always being judged from above. As this story continues to unfold, one conclusion feels unavoidable to many watching closely. If these claims carry truth, this marriage wasn't undone by betrayal. It was dismantled by control. And this is only the opening chapter. What came next wasn't distance, it was acceleration. Behind the polished interviews and carefully worded public appearances, sources now claim the atmosphere inside that house grew more oppressive with each passing day. What once felt like strain allegedly calcified into daily confrontation. Commentary amplified by Tasha K suggests the dynamic shifted from uneasy tolerance to something far more toxic, a non-stop audit of loyalty. Every exchange analyzed. Every disagreement stored away like future testimony. Allegedly, Todd began to understand that effort no longer mattered. Apologies didn't ease tension. Compromise didn't restore trust. Each attempt to de-escalate was reportedly reinterpreted as strategy. And once intent is dismissed, perception becomes final, guilt no longer needs proof. Insiders say disputes stopped focusing on behavior and started targeting identity. Todd wasn't challenged for what he did, but for who he was presumed to be. A fixed narrative. Immutable. Opportunistic. Strategic. Unfaithful. Those labels, sources allege, were repeated so often they eclipsed reality itself. And when character erosion becomes routine, marriage stops feeling like a union and starts feeling like a courtroom with no defense allowed. According to accounts now circulating, even spaces meant for healing allegedly became arenas of tension. Family events reportedly carried an edge. Celebrations were strained. Todd's presence, some claim, was endured rather than embraced. The role of husband quietly blurred into that of tolerated outsider. Then there's the element rarely discussed out loud, authority. Sources suggest Mama Joyce's presence in the household wasn't passive. It was firm, directive, unyielding. Decisions were challenged. Lines were crossed. And when those lines were resisted, critics allege the response came swiftly: verbal pressure, emotional escalation, public undermining. Todd, according to claims, wasn't simply corrected. He was reduced. But the deepest damage, insiders argue, didn't unfold between adults. It unfolded around the children. Allegedly, Riley's bond with Todd didn't collapse because of a single event, but because trust was methodically weakened. Subtle remarks, repeated cautions, carefully framed concerns designed to reshape perception. Observers note that once fear is introduced into a child's understanding of home, it doesn't dissipate, it compounds. At the same time, Kayla's footing remained uncertain. Claims suggest she lived under constant emotional evaluation, watched more closely, judged more sharply, measured by different expectations, neither fully included nor fully shielded. According to those familiar with the situation, that imbalance doesn't fade, it scars, especially when a child senses acceptance is conditional. And as this unfolded, the whispers grew louder. Tasha K alleges that doubts about Todd's fidelity weren't incidental, that they served a function. Each rumor reinforced the same conclusion: he could not be trusted. Proof wasn't necessary. Repetition filled the gap. Eventually, even restraint was rebranded as concealment. Todd's reactions, sources say, shifted over time. Defense turned into silence. Explanation into withdrawal. And when a person realizes their words no longer influence the outcome, disengagement becomes survival. But insiders argue that silence was then weaponized, interpreted as admission rather than exhaustion. Once again, Kandi stood in the center. According to claims, she tried to manage the fallout, to soften exchanges, to preserve calm where possible. But calm, in this environment, allegedly came at a cost. Loyalty checks, emotional ultimatums, expectations that shifted without warning. And when peace requires one person to absorb constant blame, resentment inevitably follows. Those watching closely say the collapse wasn't explosive. It was subdued. It was the realization that the narrative would never reset. Todd could comply. He could provide. He could stay present. He could remain committed. None of it would erase the original judgment placed on him. And living beneath permanent suspicion, sources suggest, corrodes even the strongest connection. Public belittlement reportedly became normalized. Remarks disguised as humor. Criticism delivered casually. Dismissals that lingered long after conversations ended. Some allegations even claim Todd's parents were pulled into the conflict, stretching the fracture past any realistic repair. By then, insiders say the marriage was already empty. Two people sharing space, without sharing safety. When the separation finally surfaced, the public saw an announcement. What they didn't see, according to those close to the situation, was the cost already paid. The prolonged emotional attrition. The sleepless nights filled with unresolved strain. The gradual loss of intimacy that occurs when defense replaces trust. Then came the shift. As Tasha K's commentary spread, the framing changed from quiet breakdown to public reckoning. No longer described as simple incompatibility, but as prolonged interference. A pressure system that critics argue never allowed the relationship to stand independently. The debate now isn't whether the marriage ended. It's whether it was ever allowed to live. Because if these allegations carry weight, then the outcome wasn't coincidence. It was accumulation. Influence applied repeatedly. Doubt reinforced daily. Emotional leverage sustained until resistance collapsed. And as this story continues circulating, one question grows harder to ignore. When does concern cross into control? When does protection become possession? And when does love suffocate beneath someone else's fear? Those answers remain unresolved, but the aftermath is visible. A divided family, children affected, a marriage dissolved, and a legacy now shadowed by allegations that refuse to disappear. This is no longer just gossip. It's an anatomy of how power dismantles intimacy slowly, deliberately, until nothing familiar survives. And the story isn't finished yet. What remains now is the aftermath, and according to voices amplifying the story, aftermath is where the truth tends to bleed through the cracks. As the marriage unraveled quietly behind closed doors, sources claim the emotional damage didn't simply disappear with separation papers. It lingered. It hardened. It reshaped how every person involved would be remembered in this narrative. What once looked like a private family dispute now reads, to many observers, like a prolonged power struggle that never paused long enough for healing to occur. Allegedly, by the time distance replaced daily confrontation, the roles had already been cemented. Todd, in the eyes of those aligned against him, remained the suspect, no exoneration offered, no benefit of the doubt restored. Kandi, caught between devotion and duty, was left carrying the weight of a choice she may never have truly been allowed to make freely. And Mama Joyce, according to critics, remained the constant, unwavering in her belief that intervention was protection, not destruction. But protection, as this story suggests, can become a weapon when it refuses to loosen its grip. Commentary surrounding this situation now paints a picture of emotional exhaustion that predated the public split. Friends allegedly noticed the withdrawal, the guarded interactions, the careful wording, the absence of warmth that once defined the relationship. When love becomes cautious, insiders argue it's already in danger. And yet, despite everything, there are claims that Todd continued trying, continued showing up, continued absorbing criticism without retaliation. Some say that restraint was misread. That silence became suspicion. That patience was framed as calculation. In an environment where narrative outweighs nuance, reality rarely survives intact. As the story spread, attention turned toward accountability, or the lack of it. Observers began questioning why interference was normalized, why boundaries weren't reinforced earlier, why the emotional needs of children allegedly went unprotected while adult conflicts dominated the household. These questions didn't surface during the marriage. They arrived afterward, when the cost could no longer be ignored. And then there's the issue of legacy. Kandi Burruss isn't just a public figure. She's a brand built on resilience, independence, and creative power. Todd Tucker entered that world not as a rival, but as a partner, at least initially. Critics now argue that the collapse of their marriage complicates that legacy, introducing a narrative where autonomy clashed with influence, and love was forced to compete with fear. Tasha K's involvement escalated everything. Her commentary didn't whisper. It accused. It reframed. It dragged private grievances into a public forum where speculation thrives and nuance suffocates. According to her, this wasn't miscommunication or incompatibility. It was orchestration. A systematic effort to undermine trust until separation felt inevitable. Not everyone agrees. Supporters of Mama Joyce argue that maternal instinct can be loud, especially when wealth and exposure raise the stakes. They claim concern was misinterpreted, boundaries misunderstood, intentions unfairly villainized. But critics counter with one question that refuses to disappear. If the intention was protection, why did it leave so much damage behind? The children remain the silent witnesses in this story. Allegedly shaped by adult conflict, forced to navigate divided loyalties, and left carrying emotional residue they never consented to inherit. Experts often note that when children are drawn into marital disputes, the scars last longer than the marriage itself. And those scars don't fade simply because the adults move on. As the narrative continues circulating, public opinion fractures. Some see Todd as a casualty of control. Others see him as misunderstood. Some question Kandi's silence. Others respect it. And many view Mama Joyce as either a fierce protector or an unyielding force unwilling to release control. The truth, as always, sits somewhere between perception and reality, obscured by emotion, amplified by commentary, and filtered through loyalty. What's undeniable is this: the marriage didn't end in a vacuum. It ended under pressure. Pressure from expectations, from influence, from narratives repeated so often they became accepted without verification. Pressure that didn't ease even when the vows were exchanged, and certainly didn't disappear when they were broken. Now, with time creating distance, the story reads less like gossip and more like a warning. About what happens when third voices dominate intimate spaces. About how unchecked influence can erode trust faster than betrayal ever could. About how love, no matter how genuine, struggles to survive when it's constantly required to prove itself against accusations that never reset. As fans dissect interviews and replay old scenes, they're no longer just watching entertainment. They're witnessing the remnants of a relationship that may have collapsed long before it was acknowledged publicly. The smiles now feel strained in retrospect. The laughter cautious. The moments that once seemed playful now appear performative. And the question keeps resurfacing, louder each time. Was this marriage ever allowed to exist on its own terms? Because if these allegations hold any weight, then the ending wasn't sudden. It was scheduled. Written gradually through influence, pressure, and unwavering suspicion. A conclusion reached not by one catastrophic mistake, but by 1,000 smaller cuts that never healed. In the end, divorce wasn't the scandal. The process was the slow dismantling of trust, the normalization of interference, the emotional toll paid quietly while the public remained unaware. That's what now defines this story for many watching from the outside. And as the dust settles, one truth remains uncomfortable but persistent. Love cannot thrive where control refuses to loosen its hold. Whether this narrative will ever be fully resolved is uncertain. What's clear is that its impact extends beyond two people. It touches children, legacies, and the public's understanding of where concern ends and domination begins. This wasn't just the collapse of a marriage. It was the exposure of how fragile love becomes when it's forced to exist under constant judgment. And once that exposure happens, there's no going back. And now the question isn't whether this marriage failed, it's who was allowed to survive it. Because when you strip away the interviews, the smiles, the carefully worded statements, what's left is a story that feels uncomfortably familiar, a love story crushed under constant judgment, rewritten by voices that refuse to step back, and slowly bled out while the world applauded from the sidelines. This wasn't a breakup that happened overnight. It was a collapse that unfolded in silence, one accusation at a time, until walking away felt less painful than staying. What makes this tragedy hit harder is that no one walks out clean. Not the husband who spent years trying to prove his worth. Not the wife forced to choose between loyalty and love. Not the children who absorbed tension they never asked for. And not the family legacy now permanently shadowed by questions that won't disappear. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. Once control replaces trust, love doesn't die dramatically, it suffocates. Quietly. Publicly smiling, privately breaking. So ask yourself this before you scroll away. If love has to constantly defend itself, is it really love? If boundaries are ignored in the name of protection, who's actually being protected? And when a marriage ends under relentless pressure, do we blame the collapse or the weight that caused it? This story isn't finished just because the paperwork is signed. The emotional fallout is still unfolding. The narratives are still being rewritten. And the silence from those closest to it all is louder than any denial could ever be. If this shocked you, disturbed you, or made you rethink what really happens behind closed doors, don't look away. Drop your thoughts. Share this story. Debate it. Because stories like this only stay buried when people stop asking hard questions. And if this is what really happened, then the divorce wasn't the scandal. The truth was,